G'day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece for Reason to Resist on October 14th, 2025. In the past 48 hours, there have been truly momentous developments in occupied Palestine. During the night at 3 a.m. local time today, the resistance released a photograph of Gaza bathed in the moonlight with the caption, "Complete calm prevails over all areas of the Gaza Strip." 8 hours later, at approximately 11:30 a.m. local time this morning, the complete calm was predictably broken by the murderous Israeli regime. At that time, the resistance reported that an Israeli drone strike had murdered at least 3 Palestinians just east of Gaza City. The resistance, of course, called upon the so-called guarantors of this so-called peace deal to restrain Israel's murderous regime. It remains to be seen whether they'll do so. But the most important thing I would say that happened yesterday was that the genocidal entity released almost 2,000 Palestinians from its dungeons, while the resistance in the Gaza Strip released the last of its prisoners, 20 military-aged men, some of whom were seized on October 7, 2023 from the Israeli military bases that ring the Gaza concentration camp. Also yesterday, resistance fighters emerged from the tunnels and wreckage of Gaza to assert visible control over the Strip in broad daylight in the areas from which Israel's genocidal forces had withdrawn. To reestablish security in those areas, resistance fighters carried out operations against Israel-backed gangs that have looted aid and terrorized their fellow Palestinians during the past several months of genocide. In retaliation, members of one of these gangs brutally murdered a widely admired Palestinian journalist. And of course, hovering above it all was Donald, basking in the glory of the moment. On Air Force One, Trump made remarkable during a 15-minute scrum with some of his hand-picked so-called journalists. Today, we're going to cover all of this and more. But before we do that, I'd like to remind you to like and share this video if you find it to be informative. And if you're not already a subscriber, we warmly encourage you to become one. We are trying to achieve a goal of 150,000 subscribers by the end of 2025. We're currently approaching 110,000, and we ask you to join our audience, for whom we have tremendous respect and appreciation. Thank you. Now, let's get into the events of the last 48 hours. First, I'd like to begin with the prisoner exchange. Yesterday, the genocidal Israeli entity released 1,700 Palestinians whom it had seized from Gaza after October 7, 2023, as well as about 250 Palestinians serving life sentences handed down, for the most part, by Israel's military tribunals. The 1,700 Palestinians from Gaza were imprisoned with zero justification. They were, in every sense of the word, hostages, but the Western corporate media and political elites never referred to them as such. I can't remember a single time, not once during the more than 2 years of genocide we have witnessed in horror, when a Western leader or a corporate media outlet from the West referred to these 1,700 Palestinians from Gaza, or any of them, as hostages. As usual, they lied to us about what Israel was doing to Palestinians. The 1,700 liberated Palestinian hostages were sent back to Gaza. Now imagine, will you, their conflicted feelings when they arrived there. On the one hand, they must have been elated to be out of the Israeli hellholes in which they had been held for many months. On the other, they discovered that their beloved Gaza Strip was gone, destroyed almost entirely by the Western-backed genocidal entity. And in some cases, they discovered worse than that. As I'll explain in a moment, they discovered that children and spouses had been murdered by the genocidal entity while they were in detention. Now, as I explained in a report last week, the agreement signed by Hamas and Israel about 10 days ago contained an absurd requirement about the prisoner exchange. And here you will be able to see on the screen the one-page agreement which they signed. And Clause 5, paragraph 5 of this agreement concerns the exchange of prisoners. And the very last clause of paragraph 5, 5G, states the exchange of hostages and prisoners will be done according to the mechanism agreed upon through the mediators and through the ICRC without any public ceremonies or media coverage. I repeat, without any public ceremonies or media coverage. Now, why would this agreement contain that clause? It's certainly hard to imagine that the resistance insisted upon that clause. After all, it would want to show to Palestinians in the broader world that it had secured the release of nearly 2,000 Palestinians from Israeli dungeons, and would also want those Palestinians to tell the media and their fellow Palestinians about the horrors that they experienced in Israel's hellholes. And that is exactly why Israel would not want there to be media coverage of their release. This requirement was almost certainly included in the agreement at the insistence of the genocidal Netanyahu regime, precisely so that it could minimize the communication of information to the world about what had been happening in Israeli prisons. In the hours leading up to the release of the hostages, Israel's genocide forces, consistently with my interpretation of who demanded this clause in the agreement, raided the homes of prisoners in the occupied West Bank. And here you'll see a brief report from the Palestinian Prisoners Media's office. The occupation forces, it reported, are conducting a wide campaign of raids on prisoners' homes in the cities of the West Bank and occupied Jerusalem, warning the families of prisoners expected to be released in the resistance deal against filming, raising flags, holding reception ceremonies, and praising and thanking the resistance in Gaza. Yes, this is what passes, folks, for the only democracy in the Middle East. We see yet again how much it holds the fundamental democratic right of free speech in complete and utter contempt. Nevertheless, there was some limited media coverage of the release of Palestinian prisoners. The media coverage included a report by a so-called journalist from Israel from one of the prisons in which the prisoners to be freed were being held. And I'm going to share this, frankly, disgraceful report with you. It's quite brief.
אלה המחבלים עם דם על הידיים, מחבלים מאסרי עולם שמשוחררים במסגרת עסקת שחרור החטופים הנוכחית, ממש מכינים אותם לקראת השחרור. עכשיו אנחנו רואים את המסע של המחבלים לפוסטה בדרך לעיון בחלק ציון, משם יעברו לרצועת עזה ויגורשו בדרך לאירוע היסטורי, קבלת חזרתם של החטופים שלנו.
So there you saw these Palestinians blindfolded, forced to hunch over in a straight line. They were tied to each other, tied with, and had their own hands tied behind their backs. I think we can fairly infer that the intention here was to not only humiliate them, but to show to the genocide supporters who make up a large majority of the Israeli population that they were being humiliated before their liberation. Such is the comportment of the psychopaths who run the state of Israel. Now, most of the media coverage showed, such as it was, Palestinian jubilation at the release of their comrades. Here's drone footage of the hostages arriving in Khan Yunis in the south of the Gaza Strip, which was once a bustling city of 400,000. The footage was posted on YouTube by Middle East Eye. And you can see there probably, certainly thousands of Palestinians have entered the streets. You can see also that the buildings on this street appears to be a main thoroughfare through Khan Yunis are heavily damaged. Some of them behind, you can see a number of demolished buildings, burnt out building. There's a burnt out building there. And I must say that I have nothing but admiration and respect. Look at the size of that crowd. That's quite remarkable. Nothing but admiration and respect for the willingness of Palestinians to come out into broad daylight and show their solidarity with their fellow Gazans as they are released from Israeli dungeons, despite the immense dangers of doing so, because Israel, of course, has complete air supremacy over Gaza, and no rational human being would trust it to respect the ceasefire. And as I just indicated, in fact, it is reported that this morning there was a drone strike that murdered several Palestinians east of Gaza City. So that is some of what we were able to see from the streets of the Gaza Strip yesterday as these 1,700 Palestinian hostages were bussed into Khan Yunis. The 250 Palestinian prisoners serving life sentences were transported to a different location, Ramallah, in the occupied West Bank. And here's a glimpse of what happened upon their arrival there. And this video, by the way, was published on YouTube by Forbes. If you look behind that ICRT, you can see some armed men. I don't believe that those are security forces, probably 2,000. Now, I ask you, my friends, do Palestinians in these images appear to you to be a defeated people? Or do they look more like a people who are celebrating a victory? I'll leave you to decide that. And now, before I offer details about some of the Palestinians released yesterday, I want to say a word about the life sentences of the 250 prisoners who were delivered to Ramallah. I believe, needless to say, as do all people of conscience, in the presumption of innocence for all persons. In the case of these 250 Palestinian prisoners, they were convicted mostly, if not entirely, by Israel's military tribunals. I can assure you, because I've studied the rules governing these military tribunals for a number of years, that they are almost entirely bereft of due process requirements, the kinds of due process requirements that we take for granted in the courts of Western countries. Not only that, but these military tribunals are staffed by racist military judges. Unsurprisingly, therefore, Israel's military tribunals have an extremely high conviction rate. A human rights organization called the Human Rights Defenders Fund, which is situated in Palestine, recently compiled a report on Israel's military tribunals in the occupied West Bank. It was based on statistics obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request from the Israeli regime. The group found that between January 2018 and April 2021, a little more than 3 years, 96% of cases adjudicated by these military tribunals ended in conviction. 99.9% of those convictions were the result of plea bargains, right? So almost never were there contested trials, which should tell you something. That should tell you that, for one thing, the accused had no confidence in the neutrality or fairness of the adjudicator. And secondly, there were probably all kinds of pernicious forms of coercion being used, including, of course, torture, to extract plea bargains from these people and avoid having to prove anything in accordance with due process and in the light of judicial day. So these are not real courts. These are kangaroo courts of an apartheid regime. Not only do they lack due process and exhibit an obscene conviction rate, but also Israelis consider all Palestinian attacks on the occupying military forces and armed illegal Israeli settlers to be acts of terrorism, even though under international law they are legitimate forms of self-defense against the occupier. So for all of these reasons, I myself attach zero weight to convictions entered by Israel's military tribunals. To my mind, those convictions are worth no more than toilet paper. Unless and until I see credible, independent evidence that an accused Palestinian committed acts that can fairly be described as criminal or terrorism, I presume those Palestinians to be innocent. That's not to say that I know them to be innocent. I simply apply a presumption of innocence because that's what civilized people do in the absence of credible, independent, and compelling evidence of criminality. Now, let's take a closer look at some of the prisoners released in Ramallah. And let me begin with a prisoner by the name, let's start with Gaza, not with Ramallah. This is a prisoner by the name of Haitham Muin Salem. They're showing there, this is a post, I think this was yesterday or today, on the Resistance News Network Telegram channel. And this photograph shows this individual, Haitham Muin Salem, at the moment when he discovers, shortly after his liberation, that his wife, Ikhlas Isa, and their children, Iman, Lian, and Bara, were murdered by the Israeli entity while he was in incarceration. They ascended as martyrs in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza weeks prior, according to the Resistance News Network. And may their memory be eternal. Now, let's look at some of the individuals that were freed into Ramallah. And here is a post regarding a liberated prisoner by the name of Saeed Bisharat. This is the first photo of him. He was a prominent journalist and was liberated from Zionist prisons yesterday. He was kidnapped by the Israeli occupation forces from Al-Shifa Hospital in March 2024 during the genocide. He's from the Tubas refugee camp in the West Bank. He was deported to Gaza in 2011 after he was freed in the Wafa al-Harar prisoner exchange, and he was imprisoned on charges of participating in Al-Qassam operations in the West Bank during the Second Intifada. As you can see in the photograph on the left, he's clearly lost a considerable amount of weight from the time when that photograph on the right was taken of him, presumably before his incarceration. Another journalist reportedly freed yesterday to Ramallah. This is a post from the Samadoun Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network. After 40 months in administrative detention, it reads, the occupation forces, in a separate release from the Tufan al-Harar prison exchange, released Nidal Abu Akr, journalist, activist, and organizer who has spent years without charge or trial in administrative detention under repeated arrest today. Welcome home, Nidal, freed alongside your fellow freedom fighters. So you can be sure, by the way, if these characters, these so-called prosecutors in the Israeli military justice system, had any evidence at all that a Palestinian, even the thinnest of evidentiary reads, to offer to a military judge that the Palestinian had committed what the Israeli regime regards as an act of terrorism, of course they would charge the person, and of course they would prosecute the person. If they hold him in administrative detention or her in administrative detention for years and never even bring a charge, that's because they have zero evidence. They don't have even the semblance of evidence to convict or even to attempt a prosecution in these kangaroo military tribunals. So you should assume the fair and rational inference is somebody held for years in administrative detention in an Israeli hellhole is an innocent person. And they're there simply because the occupier considers them to be an irritation, which obviously that is how Israel regards Palestinian journalists such as this individual, Nidal Abu Akr, who report the truth about what Israel is doing to the Palestinian people. Now, here is another interesting case of a Palestinian released into Ramallah yesterday. His name is Nader Mamdouh Saleh Sadaka, and he's described as a leader and fighter in the Palestinian resistance, sentenced to 6 life sentences. He embraced freedom yesterday after 21 years in Zionist prisons. He was born in 1977 in Nablus. And interestingly, he's part of the Samaritan community. The Samaritans are one of the oldest branches of Judaism and are part of the Palestinian Jewish communities. This community mainly lives in Nablus and in Holon in the territories colonized in 1948. And Samaritans are recognized as Palestinians by all parties of the resistance. So even Palestinian Jews are subjected to the horrors of Israel's military justice system. And finally, I'd like to show you a report on a Palestinian prisoner released yesterday at Ramallah by the name of Baha Yusuf Abdelkader Masarwa al-Shibrawi, born on July 23rd, 1980, hometown of Nur Sham's camp, the refugee camp in Tulkarm. He spent 35 years in the occupation's prisons. I imagine that is a photo taken of him before he was imprisoned when he was a young man and in good condition. The charge against him was allegedly being affiliated with the Saraya al-Quds, the military arm, I believe, of Islamic Jihad, and allegedly carrying out qualitative operations against the occupation forces. So the allegation was that he attacked the occupying military. That is not terrorism, and that is something that the Palestinians have as of right. Today, Baha, the post continues, is liberated by the orders of the Palestinian resistance as part of the prisoner exchange. Baha Yusuf Shibrawi, the Knight of Tulkarm, as he was called, was born in 1980 in the Nur Shams camp. He entered the life of resistance at an early age with a deep love for jihad. Baha is the brother of the martyr hero Abdelkader Shibrawi, who ascended to martyrdom on September 4th, 1992. As a result of yesterday's prisoner exchange, the total number of Palestinians released from Israel's dungeons since October 7th, 2023 is nearly 4,000 prisoners. And here I'd like to give you the precise breakdown. The number is 3,985 plus Palestinian prisoners. The total included 486 serving life sentences, 114 women, 297 children, 33 expected life sentences and high sentences, 2,724 prisoners arrested from Gaza after October 7th. So you can see that quite a large number of persons have been released from these dungeons in the past 2 years or so. However, thousands of Palestinians remain in these hellish pits of depravity. Earlier this year, the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem reported on the number of Palestinians in Israeli prisons. B'Tselem's report was based on Israeli government statistics. Its report disclosed that as of the end of 2024, so about 10 months ago, Israel was holding nearly 10,000 Palestinians on what it described as security grounds. The precise number was 9,619. Of those, 2,216 were from the Gaza Strip. At that time, Israel was also holding 1,705 Palestinians for being in Israel illegally. This is, of course, their homeland, but Israel considered their presence to be illegal. And that comes to a total of more than 11,000 Palestinian prisoners. Really, we should be calling them, as I said many times, hostages. At the end of December 2024, more than 3,300 Palestinians were being held at administrative detention. And as I've just explained, if Israel won't even bring a charge against them in the military tribunals, these kangaroo apartheid military tribunals, it is a certainty that Israel has no credible evidence that they have been engaged in any activity that would constitute a crime under the heinously unjust laws of the occupation. In addition, according to B'Tselem, at the end of 2024, Israel was holding 113 Palestinian minors on quote-unquote security grounds, and another 93 Palestinian minors on the grievous offense of being in Israel illegally, again, of being in their homeland illegally. So that's a total of 206 Palestinian minors being held in Israel's dungeons at the end of 2024. As far as I know, the majority of these minors remain in Israeli hellholes, as do thousands of adult Palestinians, as I just said, many of whom are being held without charge or trial. In August 2024, the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem released a detailed report on Israel's detention camps. That report was entitled, "Welcome to Hell, the Israeli Prison System as a Network of Torture Camps." And according to B'Tselem, and I'm quoting here, this report concerns the treatment of Palestinian prisoners and the inhuman conditions they have been subjected to in Israeli prisons since 7 October 2023. B'Tselem's research for the report included collecting testimonies from 55 Palestinians who were incarcerated in Israeli prisons and detention facilities during this time. 30 of the witnesses are residents of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. 21 are residents of the Gaza Strip, and 4 are Israeli citizens. The testimonies were given to B'Tselem after the witnesses were released from prison, the overwhelming majority of them without being tried. So this is what happened to these people who weren't even tried, some of whom were Israeli citizens. The testimonies clearly indicate, according to B'Tselem, a systemic institutional policy focused on the continual abuse and torture of all Palestinian prisoners held by Israel. I repeat, all. B'Tselem goes on. Frequent acts of severe arbitrary violence, sexual assault, humiliation and degradation, deliberate starvation, forced unhygienic conditions, sleep deprivation, prohibition on and punitive measures for religious worship, confiscation of all communal and personal belongings, in other words, thievery, and denial of adequate medical treatment. These descriptions appear time and again in the testimonies in horrifying detail and with chilling similarities. In summary, and I'm speaking now, not B'Tselem, to ignore the Palestinians who remain in these dungeons of depravity, and to do so while lavishing attention, rapturous attention, on the 20 military-age Israeli men who've just been released from Gaza, frankly, that's the worst kind of racism. Now, I want to say something about some of the Palestinians who were not released. One of them is Marwan Barghouti. According to credible polls, and as I've reported on several occasions in the recent past, polls done in occupied Palestine, Marwan Barghouti is quite likely the most popular resistance leader. There was most recently a May 2025 poll done across the occupied Gaza Strip and the occupied West Bank, which found that within a three-way race involving Marwan Barghouti, the leader of Hamas at the time, and the Mahmoud Abbas, the collaborationist president of the Palestinian Authority, Marwan Barghouti would win by a significant margin with about 50% of the vote, and the Hamas candidate would come in second with, I think it was in the range of about 38% of the vote, and Mahmoud Abbas would get a lowly 11%. That tells you all you need to know why Israel adamantly refuses to release this man, despite the fact that the resistance groups, not just Hamas, but all the resistance groups, repeatedly demanded in negotiations that he be finally granted his freedom. Yesterday, Marwan Barghouti's wife issued a statement, which I'd like to share with you. And here you can see a picture of her with a photograph of Marwan Barghouti when he was much younger, and I imagine much healthier than it is today. And she writes, "In sacrifice for Gaza, and sacrifice for Palestine, and sacrifice for our people, it is true, Marwan, that it is hard and painful, but I know you, and I know that what eases your pain is the end of destruction, ruin, and crime against our people in Gaza. Now you rejoice, even though you are alone, at the end of the massacre, imagining those returning to Al-Rashid Street, wondering how to ease their unbearable pain and torment as they face loss, rubble, and many great dangers bidding farewell to the freed and comforting and patting the shoulders of those remaining in this hell. I know you think, even if only to yourself, on behalf of a people yearning for freedom and a decent life, searching for ways to lighten the burden and hardships of the days for the families, determined on the unity of the people in the land, planning to give every child a space of life and hope, recalling your comrades and conversing in your mind with the living and the martyrs. Your companion remembers your words well from 41 years ago. You told me Palestine has priority until liberation and our share of life comes afterward. And you were right. I replied to you then, is Palestine yours alone? And I still try to uphold the pledge despite all the pain it carries. Despite all the suffering, the mother's heart inside me feels great relief and carries a dream of a new dawn for mothers. I, the family, and your people who love you and whom you love await you. And we will meet soon. There's at least one other Barghouti whom Israel refused to release, and his name is Qassem Barghouti. And I'd like to show you a report on a resistance channel about this prisoner. The family of the prisoner posted on social media, quote, "My brother, the prisoner Qassem Barghouti, who walks toward a life sentence with the steady steps of one holding on to burning embers, knows full well the nature of this enemy, its deceit, treachery, and brutality. He chose the path of truth, undaunted by how few tread it. He chose it willingly, not out of compulsion, knowingly, not in ignorance, faithfully, not under delusion. In his name we say, knowing that his name is not included in the deal, that sparing even a single drop of blood from a hungry child in Gaza is far more important than Qassem gaining the freedom he sacrificed for the sake of the children of this land." And his mother, Widad Barghouti, also shared the following message: "I speak here as the mother of a prisoner who had great hope that her son would be released, and I say this: the feeling of disappointment weighs heavily on all of us, on our beloved prisoners, and even on the negotiators themselves. But it is unfair to say that the negotiators have abandoned or betrayed the prisoners. These negotiators have lost their families, their homes, and every breath they take has been paid for in blood. They gave their utmost effort without turning away from those who deserted them and left them in their hardship. They negotiated with a malicious, criminal, deceitful occupier, one that manipulates names just as it has long manipulated history and geography to justify its crimes. So let us not burden the negotiators more than they are already burdened. We must not deny them their due or wrong them. No one could endure what they have endured. This is a filthy stage with a filthy enemy and mediators who are neither honest nor courageous. They are either complicit with the enemy or too eager to appease it. Were the negotiators representing the resistance in an easy or comfortable position? This is simply a word of truth, nothing more." I think here we see, and there is a mountain of evidence to support the proposition that amongst the Palestinian people today, there is a really breathtaking degree of unity and solidarity. These are just two of the thousands of Palestinians who remain in Israel's dungeons. Now that all living Israeli prisoners have been released from Gaza, the corporate media and the political elite, to the extent they paid any attention at all to the Palestinian hostages, will undoubtedly forget completely about those Palestinians who remain in horrific conditions in Israeli prisons. But we will not forget. We will continue to advocate for their release, as will all supporters of the Palestinian cause. Now, while Israel was delivering 1,700 Palestinian hostages to Gaza, resistance fighters emerged from the tunnels and wreckage of the Strip to reassert visible control over the areas from which Israel's genocide forces had evacuated. And I want to show you a video of resistance fighters in the street of Khan Yunis yesterday. Now, I don't know about you, my friends, but I don't have the impression that those fighters look remotely interested in giving up their weapons. As soon as Israeli forces withdrew, Hamas announced an amnesty for members of criminal gangs that have collaborated with Israel during the genocide. These notorious gangs repeatedly looted humanitarian aid meant for the starving civilian population of Gaza. And here's the announcement of the amnesty. The Ministry of Interior and National Security in Gaza announced opening the door for general amnesty for members of criminal gangs who were not involved in murder. So as you can see, the amnesty does not extend to murderers during the Israeli war of genocide. The amnesty period requires individuals to surrender to security services within 1 week, starting October 13th, 2025, to settle their legal status and restore public order. Otherwise, they will be pursued by the security services who have significantly increased their deployment in recent days. Now, some of these gang members refused to surrender, as the Ministry of the Interior had directed to the ministry, and therefore the resistance launched military operations against them. And here is a brief report on those military operations. Resistance security forces completed 2 successful operations against collaborator and outlaw militias in the Gaza Strip. The first mission targeted a criminal militia in Al Sabra neighborhood in Gaza City, where security forces seized control of the area before killing and arresting dozens of militants. Sources in Gaza confirmed that the group had refused to surrender themselves to security forces in exchange for amnesty. The second mission targeted a militia in Khan Yunis, southern Gaza Strip. Over 58 members of militia were arrested following intense clashes. One member, confirmed to be a spy for the occupation, was executed. Beginning tomorrow, internal security forces in Gaza will open a week-long window for outlaw militants to surrender themselves in exchange for amnesty. Now, in retaliation for these operations, some gang members apprehended, tortured, and murdered a widely admired Palestinian journalist Salah al-Jafarawi. And here you will see a report of the murder of this journalist. The resistance in Gaza City moments ago executed 7 collaborators affiliated with the Dagmash clan. Members of the clan kidnapped and killed journalist martyr Salah al-Jafarawi. They also killed the sons of 3 Hamas and Al-Qassam leaders in the last few days, in addition to a number of resistance security forces. And here you can see, posted on a resistance Telegram channel, this was the last video by the slain journalist before he was murdered. And in it, he reportedly said, "By God, you need 1,000,000 years to break the will of these people, and you won't break it." From the very next day, the bulldozers came down to open the roads, and the people didn't wait for reconstruction, starting to rebuild themselves, repairing their homes themselves, and removing the rubble from in front of their houses themselves. God is great, what a people you are, and by God, we deserve life. By God, praise be to God in any case. And that, as I say, was the final video of the Palestinian journalist Salah al-Jafarawi before being martyred at the hands of criminal armed gangs south of Gaza City yesterday. Now, as I've indicated, there have been what appear to be summary executions by the resistance forces in the Gaza Strip. Yesterday, a comrade sent to me a particularly gruesome video of what is claimed to be a punishment being meted out to a member of one of these criminal gangs that was stealing food and was collaborating with the genocidal Israeli military. I've, over the course of the past 2 years of genocide, forced myself to watch many brutal videos, not because they're anything other than traumatic to watch, but because I want to be able to bear witness and to report as accurately as I can what is happening in the Gaza Strip, where the genocide has been unfolding. And it is just, if you're going to do this kind of journalism, it behooves you to look at the evidence, such as it is. Now, I can't verify that the person who was meted out a punishment, which I'm going to describe to you in a moment in this video that I saw yesterday, was in fact a member of one of these criminal gangs. I can't even confirm that the people who meted out the punishment were resistance fighters. I don't have any way of verifying that, but I'll tell you what I saw was that this fighter, I can't say that he was a fighter for sure, but this individual with his hands tied behind his back and blindfolded, he was obviously in good physical condition before the punishment was meted out. He looked rather muscular and certainly looked to be in a healthier condition than those who meted out the punishment. And the way they meted out the punishment was that they broke his legs and broke his arms. And when I say they broke them, I mean they snapped his bones into like twigs using large wooden batons, really 2x4s. And I don't know what his ultimate fate was because the video ended at the point where they had broken his bones. But I can tell you that it was a very difficult video to watch. And I mention this because I want to sort of share with you some reflections on this, summary justice that apparently is being meted out. Whatever that video actually showed, whether or not it actually showed what the person who posted it claimed it showed, the resistance has openly acknowledged that it is carrying out executions in Gaza. Now, I've said over and over again that all persons in all circumstances should be accorded due process before there's any judgment rendered against them and any kind of a punishment meted out against them. And this is particularly true when the accusation is serious, it's severe, and the proposed punishment is severe. So I don't condone these summary executions. I don't condone in any way, shape, or form what was done to this man, even if he's guilty of what he was accused of having done. But I must also say to you, in all candor, I cannot bring myself to condemn it either, because the Palestinian people in Gaza find themselves in extraordinary circumstances, utterly desperate. There are no courts sitting in judgment in the destroyed Gaza Strip. I imagine that many of the people who were serving in the judicial system in the Gaza Strip have been killed, have been maimed, have disappeared. How in the circumstances that confront the people of Gaza at this particular moment, can there be anything even approximating due process? And at the same time, there is clearly a need in order to restore some semblance of security to the Gaza Strip that the more villainous of these collaborators, if in fact that's what they are, be brought to justice in some way. So I, again, can't in any way, shape, or form condone this, but at the same time, not having endured what the Palestinian people have endured, not being there now, living in those conditions, I can't bring myself to condemn it either. Now, within the past 48 hours, Donald Trump was asked about these developments while flying from the United States to West Asia. I'm talking, when I say these developments, about the policing of Gaza by armed fighters of the resistance. And here's what he had to say.
I'm sure you've seen reports of Hamas rearming, instituting themselves as a Palestinian police force, shooting rivals. What is your message to Hamas?
We are standing because they do want to stop the problems, and they've been open about it, and we gave them approval for a period of time. You have to understand, they've lost probably 60,000 people. That's a lot of retribution. They've lost 60,000 people, and the ones that are living right now were, in many cases, very young when this all started. And we are having them watch that there's not going to be big crime or some of the problems that you have when you have areas like this that have been literally demolished. you know, you have 2 million people, and probably it'll be less than that, but you have close to 2 million people going back to buildings that have been demolished. And a lot of bad things can happen. So we want it to be safe.
There's a lot to be said about this clip. So first of all, the Donald obviously is not objecting to the rearmament. I mean, that was the question that was put to him. They're rearming. Now, I don't know whether, in fact, they are rearming as opposed to simply employing the weapons that have always been available to them. But that's the way the question was put to him. And he said, yeah, we're okay with it for a period of time. So one wonders, based on this statement, whether or not the Trump administration is going to go to the wall on this question of the Palestinians disarming, something I'm going to come back to in a moment. Certainly, the statement does evince a degree of flexibility. We'll have to see just how much when that critical issue is brought to a head, namely, will the Palestinian resistance disarm or not? But quite apart from that important part of that excerpt, he said some other things that were quite concerning. First of all, he claimed that the number of 60,000, the number of people killed in the Gaza Strip is 60,000. Well, according to the latest reports, the number is now above 67,000. It's approaching 68,000. Every day, dozens and dozens of bodies that have been lying under the rubble are being brought to the hospitals and the morgues. So that is increasing the death count considerably, but it's much higher than 60,000, even if you go with the number of bodies that the Ministry of Health has been able to actually count and identify. But we all know, and multiple experts from across the world have explained this and confirmed this, that the number is undoubtedly much higher than the official figure being given by the Gaza Ministry of Health, because there are many people who have been killed indirectly from preventable disease, for example, from starvation. And there are many parts of the Gaza Strip. It's not just the destroyed buildings, but there are parts of the Gaza Strip where no law enforcement authority of any kind, no investigators have been able to go, where you may well find, we may well find, they may well find in the months and years ahead, mass graves, areas where people mass murdered by the genocidal Israeli military forces were buried, so that the evidence of their crimes would not be uncovered. So that number, 67 to 68,000, is a gross understatement, undoubtedly. But for some reason, Donald is saying 60,000. And notice how he described it. He described it as retribution. This is the moral compass of this man. He thinks it's legitimate just to go and kill 60,000 people, many of whom, 40%, 50% of whom are children, in retaliation for an attack carried out by a few hundred militants who had been spending their entire lives in a concentration camp created by Israel. This is, in his view, a legitimate response. He doesn't criticize that at all, and nor does he criticize the demolition of Gaza, as he calls it, even though he's openly acknowledging that Gaza has been destroyed. No hint of criticism there. In fact, in this very same interview, he went out of his way, because he was asked about the fact that when he spoke in Tel Aviv, he was cheered and Netanyahu was booed. He was asked to comment on Netanyahu, and he said Netanyahu was a wartime president and he was the right man at the right time, all of which is approval of Netanyahu's conduct of this so-called war. So for the Donald, I mean, you're clearly dealing here with a person who has absolutely no red lines, a person who has utter contempt for international law and basic principles of human rights. And the other thing which I found even more curious and disturbing was that he said, in talking about the number of people who will be returning to life in the Gaza Strip, he said the number is probably less than 2 million. Now, it's widely known that the population of the Gaza Strip prior to October 7, 2023 was in the range of 2.2 to 2.3 million. So why is Donald Trump saying that the number who are going to remain and live there is likely going to be less than 2 million? Is that because he's been advised that the death toll is actually in the range of 200,000 to 300,000, maybe more, and that he's just flat out lying yet again when he cites the figure of 60,000 people, Palestinians, as the death toll? A lot of very disturbing questions raised by that particular excerpt. Now, let me go back to this question of disarming. I mean, I indicated that this does show, I believe it does show a degree of flexibility on the question of disarming. There may be a compromise that's possible. So, for example, the resistance might say, we are prepared to give up our missiles, our rockets, which we have used to attack settlements outside of the Gaza Strip. But we're going to retain our automatic weapons. We're going to retain our rocket-propelled grenades. We're going to retain our Yasin anti-tank shells, and we're going to retain our IEDs, our improvised explosive devices. Maybe there's a compromise there to be had, but the idea that the Palestinian resistance in Gaza is going to leave itself totally defenseless against these mass murderers, I find that impossible to believe. And sure enough, there's been no indication from the resistance groups that they will disarm. They've rejected that demand repeatedly and have done so categorically. Now, Trump made a number of other eye-popping statements in this interview. Here's what he had to say about the all-important question of whether the Israeli war on Gaza has come to a definitive end.
Netanyahu, the prime minister, has not gone so far as to say the war is over. In your view, is the war between Israel and Hamas over?
War is over. The war is over. Okay, you understand that?
What guarantees have you been able to give to both the Israelis and the Arab countries?
We have a lot of guarantees.
The Israelis are very concerned.
We have a lot of verbal guarantees too, and I don't think they're going to want to disappoint me. I have a lot of verbal guarantees that aren't down in writing, but they were given to me, and I believe they're going to be held very strongly. That's why I think it's going to be successful.
So, President, you had to...
It's hard to imagine the Donald being more emphatic than that. It's over. Did you hear me? And then he went on and said, that I've got a lot of verbal guarantees, and I don't think they're going to want to disappoint me. That sounds like Donald is, taking charge of the situation here and is bossing people around. Interesting that he said those guarantees are verbal and not in writing. Why might that be? Well, that might be because the crazed psychopath Netanyahu didn't want to say in writing that we are going to end the war on Gaza. And he didn't want to do that for obvious political reasons, because it would have brought down his satanic coalition in no time, presumably, if he had made a commitment in writing to end the war on Gaza. And also it would have been very clear, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the Israeli military has been strategically defeated by the resistance forces, the lightly armed resistance forces in Gaza, who have effectively been fighting NATO for the last 2 years. NATO has been providing Israel with this ungodly weaponry, huge quantities of it, intelligence, spy flights, economic aid, you name it. Probably also there have been, American soldiers in the Gaza Strip operating, although their numbers don't appear to be large. And there have been reports of foreign mercenaries operating there. So, despite all of that, if in fact this war is effectively brought to an end, and all that remains is sporadic murderous attacks upon Palestinians by the genocidal entity, there'll just be no doubt that this has been a disastrous defeat for the Israeli military. And I can easily understand why the war criminal would not want to put that in writing. Now, having said all of that, these men have no credibility. That hasn't changed. Show me the money, man. If and when they actually keep their word, then I'll contemplate the possibility that they can be trusted. But their record is one of unrelenting dishonesty, perfidy, and treachery. So I'm not at all convinced that they aren't going to resume a full-blown war on the devastated people of the Gaza Strip. Time will tell. Now, let's move on to the next eye-popping statement that the Donald had to offer during this 15-minute scrum with reporters on the presidential aircraft. This one relates to the so-called concept of the Gaza Riviera. When asked about that, this is what Donald Trump had to say.
Until we get to the part of the 20-point peace plan where developers can go in and make Gaza the Riviera of the Middle East?
Well, I don't know about the Riviera for a while, because you take a look at what you have. You have to get people taken care of first. But it's going to start really essentially immediately. I mean, they're going to have to start by removing a lot of the structures that you see that are down to the ground. I mean, it's blasted. This is like a demolition site. Almost the entire site is. So you have to get rid of what you have there. You have structures that are very dangerous. They're falling down. If they haven't fallen, they're going to fall down of their own volition. So that process, Peter, is going to start pretty much immediately.
So, again, it seems to be a bit of some significant flexibility there, this whole idea of the Riviera, the Gaza Riviera, with, shining, gaudy casinos and, seaside skyscraping hotels, ugly as hell, blocking the view of the civilian indigenous population of the Mediterranean. It doesn't seem entirely clear that this plan is going ahead. Again, I would not at all be prepared to give Donald Trump and, the self-serving scam artists and thieves who surround him the benefit of the doubt. But for what it's worth, those statements about the so-called Gaza Riviera sound rather equivocal. And also, again, he acknowledged that Gaza is almost totally demolished. That doesn't seem to elicit the slightest bit of indignation or disapproval from the warmonger and war criminal Donald Trump. Now, Trump was also asked about the peace board, and another war criminal who's quite fortunate to be a free man to this very day, more than 20 years after he, along with George W. Bush, launched a criminal war of aggression on the people of Iraq, which resulted in over 1 million deaths of innocent Iraqis. So here's what Donald Trump had to say about the so-called peace board and Tony Blair.
You have set up in that peace plan. How soon will that new governing body be in place?
Very quickly, and everybody wants to be a part of it. You're talking about the Board of Peace?
Right. Tony Blair, yourself.
Everybody wants to be a part of it. I've had calls from all of the leaders of countries. They all want to be a part. I mean, the leaders themselves, they're not going to send somebody. They want to be a part of it.
Do you know who's going to be a part of it yet?
I do.
Can you share?
No, not yet. It's a little bit.
Have you spoken to Tony Blair about it since the...
I'm going to take your ear things out.
Have you spoken to Tony Blair about it?
I want to find out that Tony would be popular with all, because I just don't know that. And I like Tony. I've always liked Tony, but I want to find out that he's an acceptable choice to everybody.
I can assure you, Donald, that he ain't an acceptable choice to anybody living in occupied Palestine, with the possible exception of the collaborationist regime of Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, because there was a report in the last couple of days that the deputy leader of the Palestinian Authority, the second-hand collaborator of Mahmoud Abbas, met with the war criminal Tony Blair. What exactly they discussed is unclear. But there has been almost universal denunciation by Palestinians and their supporters of any suggestion that Tony Blair should have any authority whatsoever over the Gaza Strip or any involvement, monetary or otherwise, in its reconstruction. And on that whole question of, a body of non-Palestinians supervising the governance and the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip, the resistance groups have been, again, unequivocal about this. And so here is a statement put out in the last 48 hours by 3 resistance groups, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. And they say, we renew our call for national unity and responsibility to embark on a unified political and national path with all forces and factions. In coordination with our Egyptian brothers, we are working toward convening a comprehensive national meeting urgently to unify the Palestinian stance, draft a collective national strategy, and rebuild our national institutions on the principles of partnership, credibility, and transparency. We reaffirm our categorical rejection of any foreign guardianship. The determination of Gaza's governance in the framework of its institutions is an internal Palestinian matter to be decided jointly by national forces. We welcome Arab and international participation in reconstruction. Notice they say reconstruction, not governance, and development efforts, so long as they respect our people's sovereignty and right to a dignified life on their land. So they're actually going as far as saying, you know, if you're not going to respect our sovereignty and allow us to govern ourselves, we don't want your reconstruction assistance, your development assistance. We'll have to go it alone, or we'll find other sources of assistance. But, you know, we're not going to trade our sovereignty, our dignity, our right to self-determination for your money. That sounds like a pretty damn categorical rejection to me. And when I add it all up, folks, I mean, there is going to be a decisive moment very soon where these critical issues of disarmament and the governance of the Gaza Strip, and particularly this whole offensive notion of foreign guardianship, will have to be resolved, if not by means of negotiation, then by force of arms. And the all-important question is going to be whether Donald Trump will finally force Netanyahu to respect the inalienable rights of the Palestinians. They have an inalienable right to armed resistance against the occupier, and the occupation is not over. Even if the criminal war of aggression is ended, they still control the airspace, the Israelis, they still control the borders, and they still physically occupy some of the territory, the ground of the Gaza Strip. So this occupation isn't over, and they don't have self-determination. No one has a right to take their arms from them. No one has the right to impose a foreign guardianship upon them. And, you know, agreeing that neither of those things is going to happen is not a concession. It's simply acknowledging their rights and respecting their rights under international law. So that moment undoubtedly will come where these issues are going to be resolved either by means of negotiation or, let us hope it doesn't come to this, by force of arms. Now, there was an interesting statement also from the Egyptian dictator Sisi on what lies ahead. Sisi, according to the Cradle, said the two-state solution is the only way to achieve the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinians and the Israelis. The Palestinian people have the right to determine their destiny and to enjoy freedom. I call on the Israeli people to extend their hand to achieve peace. We will work in the coming days to establish common foundations for the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. Egypt will work with the U.S. and in coordination with partners to lay the foundations for moving forward in rebuilding Gaza. The Gaza agreement must be implemented to reach a two-state solution and the integration of the peoples of the region. This, too, sounds at least implicitly as a rejection of the idea that foreigners are going to rule Gaza indefinitely. And certainly it is an endorsement, unequivocal endorsement of the Palestinian right to self-determination. Whether this means anything, because it's coming from an autocrat who has been described by Donald Trump as his favorite dictator and who has betrayed the Palestinians 6 ways from Sunday, not just during the genocide, but for years before then, you know, helping Israel to enforce this inhumane blockade on the Gaza Strip. Whether this actually means anything remains to be seen. But at least superficially, El-Sisi is standing by the Palestinian right to self-determination. So my overall impression of these comments is that Trump is showing a notable degree of accommodation to the resistance. He does seem serious about ending the war on terms that the resistance can accept. But let's bear in mind not only his record, also that these comments were made just before the Israeli prisoners were released by the resistance. So there's definitely a possibility that all of those comments he made in that impromptu press conference on his flight to West Asia were just a spectacle designed to ensure that Israel gets its prisoners back. The key question remains, what will Trump do when the criminal Netanyahu regime resumes its attacks on Gaza, which, as I said at the very outset, it did this morning. Although whether this is going to become a pattern, how intense the attacks are going to be, those are open questions. So I actually entertain the possibility, not that Donald Trump has grown a conscience, he has none, not that he cares about international law, he spits on it, not that he has red lines, not that he cares about Palestinian people. I think he demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt long ago that they mean nothing to him. Their lives have zero value to him. The question is whether there is enough political pressure being brought to bear by Americans, by governments around the world, by public opinion to persuade Donald Trump that he has to shut this genocide down once and for all. I think there's a realistic prospect that that's happening when you look at the polling numbers coming out of the United States and all the negative publicity Israel is getting surrounding the Charlie Kirk murder, the Epstein files, and now also there's really an excellent article that you can find on the Electronic Intifada website, which is based in part upon recently released documents from the JFK files, making the case that Israel had a hand in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And it's not just this one, estimable journalist writing on Electronic Intifada who says this, and I'm going to leave a link to his article in the description to this video. I do commend it to you. But all of this together, but more than anything, quite apart from Epstein files, the JFK files, the Charlie Kirk murder, it's just the horror that's been coming out, the unrelenting horror that's been coming out of the Gaza Strip for more than 2 years that has caused Israel's standing in the United States to plunge, even amongst many people on the right. So I think there is a significant possibility that this has caused great alarm within the Trump administration and also within the Zionist lobby. Maybe this is just enough for the time being to bring this genocide to an end at the insistence of Donald Trump. Let us hope so, my friends. So there's one other notable statement that Trump made in this press conference, which I'd like to share with you. In the press conference, Donald Trump was asked, about the failures of the Biden administration to end Israel's war on Gaza. And of course, he insisted that only he was capable of bringing this all to a merciful conclusion. And a reporter, surprisingly, had the wherewithal to ask him, well, what did you do differently? And this is what Donald Trump had to say.
So differently, because I know a lot of it was behind the scenes. So what did you do so much differently than Joe Biden and to end the war?
I resonated with the Arab leaders, the Muslim leaders, and the Jewish leaders. For whatever reason, you tell me why.
I've just got to show you that again. Watch Donald's eyes when he hears the question.
What did you do so differently? Because I know a lot of it was behind the scenes. So what did you do so much differently than Joe Biden and to end the war? I resonated with the Arab leaders, the Muslim leaders, and the Jewish leaders. For whatever reason, you tell me why.
Yeah, I resonated. He's so charming. He's just such a lovable guy, so affectionate and affable that he altered the entire dynamic and turned a merciless slaughter of Palestinians into eternal peace. I mean, the reason why his eyes darted to the right when he got asked the question is because he was searching in his mind for some kind of an answer, and all he could come up with was, I'm a really charming guy. And you tell me. Here's the reality, folks. If in fact this genocide has been brought to an end in the Gaza Strip, and let me remind you, by the way, it's ongoing in the West Bank, okay? But let's talk about the Gaza Strip for a moment. If this is in fact coming to an end, it ain't because Donald Trump is a charming guy. It's because the political context has deteriorated so severely for Israel, and its latte-sipping, child-killing, mass-murdering army is in a pathetic state, and its leaders have realized that it isn't capable of defeating an insurgent force of men wearing sandals and using small arms, even with enough, munitions to destroy Gaza 6 or 7 times over. I mean, that's the reality here. It's just that Donald Trump happened to be in the White House when that reality set in. And I imagine, frankly, that even genocide Joe Biden, were his brain functional, and he managed somehow to remain the candidate of the Democratic Party and to win the election in his pathetic state, I imagine that he too would be finding himself under enormous pressure to shut this down right now. So much so that even that psychopath would be forced to do it. This has nothing to do with resonating. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, or the second last thing I want to talk about in this this lengthy report, is a rather suspicious development in Egypt. While the Donald was flapping his gums on a flight to West Asia, Qatari officials who were involved in the negotiations between Hamas and Israel were killed. 3 Qatari diplomats were killed and 2 injured in a car crash in the Egyptian town of Sharm el-Sheikh within the past 2 days. And here's a report of their death, and you can see there a photograph of the Mercedes they were driving. Okay, presumably it was a damn nice Mercedes. I don't think that these Qatari officials were driving in some rundown rust bucket of a Mercedes that was, built 15 years ago. No, they're far too wealthy and spoiled for that. So here they are in their flashy Mercedes, which you can see has been burnt out, destroyed. And according to this article, the diplomats and official delegations had descended on the Red Sea resort town in recent days to negotiate a Gaza ceasefire and hostage release deal. Egyptian state-linked media Al Qahada News said 5 Qataris and an Egyptian driver were in the vehicle when it crashed due to a loss of control of the steering wheel. Interesting. I don't know about you, but I don't think the steering wheels of top-end Mercedes fail catastrophically very often. I thought these were supposed to be finely engineered German vehicles. But quite apart from that, if the steering wheel failure had happened when this vehicle was pulling out of a parking lot or driving in heavy traffic in an urban area, probably the passengers would not have suffered severe injuries. Certainly hard to believe they would have been killed. For them to have been killed, at the time when the steering wheel failed, they would have been had to have been traveling at relatively high velocity. So all of that seems rather convenient. And I think one has to be very suspicious here about foul play. I don't exclude, categorically the idea or the suggestion that this was, just a simple mechanical failure and a tragedy, and that there's no foul play involved. But, given the propensity of the Israeli regime in particular to, carry out political assassinations with, delightful glee and gusto, I think you have to at least entertain the possibility that somehow Israel is behind this, or perhaps supporters of the Palestinian cause are behind this. So perhaps people who are very upset with the Qatari vassal, the Emir of Qatar, doing absolutely nothing to hold Israel accountable for attacking the city of Doha and attempting to massacre Hamas negotiators. Could have been retribution for that. So it might be somebody else who's behind an act of foul play and not the Israeli regime. But when it comes to, the question of whether or not the Israeli regime is behind this, I want to share with you a clip from an interview that the excellent independent journalist Jeremy Scahill just gave to the wonderful media outlet, independent media outlet, Electronic Intifada, about the negotiations in Egypt over this deal. And Scahill had the benefit of having interviewed leaders of the resistance about what actually happened in those negotiations. And here's what he had to say.
Win through this agreement what it has systematically failed to achieve in Gaza, which is forcing the surrender of the Palestinian people. It's not just about Hamas. They are trying to strip the entire population of Palestine of the right to armed resistance. And so what the Palestinians came back with was to say, let's talk about captives, let's talk about aid, let's talk about the genocide, and let's talk about the withdrawal of Israeli forces. All of these other issues need to be deferred, and they need to involve the participation of every political actor within Palestinian society representing a democratic will of the Palestinian people. That was the response. Shockingly, to some Palestinian negotiators, Trump responds to this and says, great news, Hamas has responded positively, and it seems like they want peace and we can make a deal. So then you had all the delegations descending on Sharm el-Sheikh, and I was told by Palestinian resistance sources who were involved with the negotiations that unprecedented pressure was being put on the Palestinians primarily by Egypt and Turkey. Qatar, I'm told, was a little more neutral and kept emphasizing this has to be a Palestinian decision, but Egypt and Turkey were basically saying, you need to make a deal here. In the end, they also acknowledged it was a Palestinian decision, but I was told there was immense pressure.
Okay, so they were putting, the Turks and the Egyptians, immense and unprecedented pressure on the Palestinian resistance to make concessions, but the Qataris were more neutral and kept stressing that this had to be, in the end, a Palestinian decision. I can imagine that would send the bloodthirsty, satanic lunatic Netanyahu and the murderers in his cabinet into a frenzy. And who knows, maybe there's more going on here. Maybe the Qataris have been putting considerable pressure, using their influence on the Donald to get him to bring an end to this genocide. And the Israelis were enraged by this and wanted to send a powerful message to the vassal, the Qatari vassal, that they weren't going to tolerate any kind of an even-handedness on the part of the Qatari negotiators, and would not stand for the Emir of Qatar and his regime using whatever influence they have with the Donald to bring this genocide to an end. So I think it's fair to say that the Israelis had a motive. They clearly had a motive to kill those senior Qatari diplomats in Egypt, and I wouldn't be even remotely surprised if they're behind it. The question here, whoever is behind it, I don't imagine that the Qatari regime, the Emir and his closest advisors are so stupid as to rule out the possibility that there's foul play here. And it's going to be quite interesting to see how this impacts their behavior in the weeks and months ahead. Now, before I sign off, I'm going to return to a subject about which I speak quite a bit nowadays. After all, we do call ourselves the Reason to Resist for a reason, and that is because of the primordial importance of resisting the crimes and atrocities and injustices of Western governments and their proxies and allies. And what I want to say specifically is this. You know, I have found repeatedly, and I'm becoming increasingly, frankly, disappointed by it, that there are a not insignificant number of people in the Palestinian solidarity movement who refuse to talk about the Palestinian right of armed resistance. And I mean, I'm talking about people here who are genuinely supportive of the Palestinian cause. And I respect them for that. I honor them for that. And they've demonstrated it through years of advocacy for the Palestinian people, activism for the Palestinian people, and various other forms of support for their struggle for freedom. But somehow they won't ever talk about the right of armed resistance. And I find that this is particularly true among supporters of the Palestinian cause who are elected officials or who are candidates for political office. Now, why won't they talk about the right to armed resistance? Well, I think the most likely explanation, and it's the one that I prefer, is that they are afraid to do so. And for obvious reasons. If you talk about the right to armed resistance, you are opening yourself up to allegations that are completely, meritless, that you're a supporter of some group that the West has designated as a terrorist organization, some Palestinian resistance group, that you yourself are a supporter of terrorism, right? And particularly if you are in politics or are seeking to enter politics, that's an allegation you're going to want to avoid. There's another possibility which I don't favor, but it's one that I can't exclude altogether. And that is some of these people, because they have been, as we all have living in the West, been subjected to a lifetime of indoctrination about the Palestinian people and their struggle for freedom, that there's a certain residual racism left in them, that they haven't completely cleansed themselves of the biases and stigmas that we have been, brainwashed into absorbing, embracing, internalizing about the Palestinian people by this relentless propaganda that we have confronted for our entire lives in Western countries. And just to be fair to these people, if in fact that's what explains their unwillingness to talk about the right to armed resistance, I'll say it's no easy thing to cleanse yourself of this indoctrination. I myself was modestly pro-Israel when I was a young adult, and it took me years, probably I would say 15 years from the time I entered university studies to become a committed supporter of the Palestinian cause. That took a lot of work, a lot of self-reflection, a lot of investigation, a lot of critical thought. So whatever the explanation may be, whether it's just outright fear or some residual racism resulting from a lifetime of indoctrination, this is no longer permissible that we avoid the subject of the right to armed resistance. I say to you that if you truly support the Palestinian cause, now is the time for you to say loudly and unequivocally that the Palestinians have a right to take up armed resistance against the oppressor and the occupier. Why do I say that? Because Israel will use the inevitable refusal of the Palestinian people to disarm as an excuse to ramp up this genocide again. That you can take as a given. Take it to the bank. It is coming, and in fact, they've already started talking about it. The Netanyahu regime has talked about, the fact that the Palestinians hasn't disarmed, and he has reiterated his absolute bloodthirsty determination to divest them of any and all weapons, even though at this stage, it is the only leverage they have in the best form of protection that they have. So if we allow him to advance this narrative without being challenged, namely that, these terrorists have to be disarmed, and because they're refusing to disarm, we're going to have to do it the hard way, and we're going to have to finish the job. If you allow them to, the Israelis, to employ this narrative without challenge, then it's going to be more likely that people who are, modestly supportive of the Palestinian cause or who are sitting on the fence are going to be persuaded that Israel has a justification for resuming this horrific violence that is visited on the people of Gaza. We must not allow the Israeli regime to deceive the public into believing that Israel has a justification for ramping up the slaughter of Palestinians again. We must defend the right of Palestinians, their legal and moral right to take up arms against their oppressor. Now more than ever, we need to shout it from the rooftops. Palestinians have a right to resist. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Kalamata, Greece on October 14th, 2025.